Um, Before I begin my talk, I would like to make a point that I think needs to be made. I think you know this, but we're living in very strange times. It's often very difficult to understand such times. The human eye may look for anomalies, but the human brain looks for that which is regular and predictable. It wants to reject anomalies and prefer instead normalcy. This is one reason that the term conspiracy theory can gain such traction. In the early days of the COVID pandemic, it was said that it might have come from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. No, that was just a conspiracy theory, it was said. That can't be true. This is heard a lot these days to the point where it really is the go-to meme on MSNBC or CNN or any of the mainstream media. When they don't like what is being said, it's a conspiracy theory, whether it's COVID, the vaccine, election fraud, or anything that deviates from the accepted narrative. When you examine everything that's going on today, you can't quite make sense of what is going on. You need to ask yourself the simple question, why is this happening? What's going on here? Is this all a series of random events, or is there order, planning, and high government policy at work? Robert Kennedy mentioned the other night the Event 201 project, the so-called tabletop experiment on how to deal with the coronavirus pandemic. That included very important people from within the government and outside the government. Avril Haines was there. She's today the Director of National Intelligence in the Biden administration. She just happened to be there. Christopher Elias from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation just happened to be there. George Gao from the Chinese CDC, representatives from the World Economic Forum and the like. People who'd be influential in the media. Now, this isn't random. This is policy at work, strategy at work. People mean to do these things for a reason. There's something going on. And as much as I enjoyed the lectures by Robert Kennedy and Naomi Wolf, and I agree with everything that was said by them, I just want to remind us once again, these are not mainstream views. Nowhere close to it. It's not going to be accepted very far outside this room, unfortunately. Nor will anything I have to say be very mainstream, no matter how much people are waking up to the threat from communist China. Much work needs to be done, and I am most grateful that Hillsdale College is at the forefront of presenting these ideas to a candid world. As chairman of the Committee on the Present Danger China, which I founded with Steve Bannon and Frank Gaffney in 2019, I have the pleasure of working with a group of scholars, writers, intellectuals, former military and intelligence officials, academic, policy analysts, and the like to understand what communist China is trying to do to destroy the United States. Much of what I have to say today will be the product of 4 years of work by the committee to try to understand the machinations of communist China and our own government, which has seemingly become very malleable and subject to manipulation by the CCP. I would humbly argue that for the last 3 years, the United States, everything the United States has experienced has been an exercise in information, political, and psychological warfare aimed at the American people, both from abroad and from forces here at home. This includes a biowarfare attack against the United States, although it was treated even today as something else. And that really is the purpose of my talk, to see if we can understand that. Specifically, I'd like to discuss the Chinese Communist Party and its interplay with Big Pharma. Now, I'd like to do 3 things this afternoon. First, I'd like to describe the strategic objectives of the Chinese Communist Party. Second, I'd like to discuss Big Pharma and how it has failed the American people. And finally, I'd like to discuss how I think both of these entities are working to destroy the United States and the free world. First, the CCP. It has a single goal: the control of the earth and all the peoples of it. 3 things should inform how we deal with and think about the Chinese Communist Party. And here we are trying to understand the Chinese Communist Party as they understand themselves. The first is that they have declared a people's war against the United States, a people's war. They declared this in May of 2019 against the United States. This was published in the People's Daily, which is a media arm of the CCP. It was a signal to the people of China that an unconventional war would be waged against the United States and that they should prepare themselves for war. So it was first a message to the Chinese people themselves. The reason for this people's war was that the United States had the temerity to try to enforce some kind of ban, some kind of mechanism to stop communist China, the People's Liberation Army, the industrial espionage units within it, and private cyber thieves within communist China from stealing about $500 billion a year in intellectual property from the United States. That's $5 trillion over a decade, the Trump administration had said. So because we had the temerity to ask them to quit stealing $5 trillion of our intellectual property, they declared a people's war on us. That's how they think of us, that whatever we have belongs to them. And I'd also say that people's war was not just about money. It was also about political control. They believed they had control of the United States before Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. They had captured the elites in the West. They thought they had bought them off. Major media figures like Rupert Murdoch were sympathetic to them. The masters of the universe on Wall Street, like Larry Fink at BlackRock or Steven Schwarzman at Blackstone, were all making billions of dollars doing business in communist China. They, the CCP, believed they had complete control of the oligarchs in the United States. That much was clear. The MAGA movement and Donald Trump, however, represented something different. It represented a genuine resurgence of American nationalism. It represented an awakening for the American people. The communist movement that has operated in this country for the better part of a century was having a lot of success prior to Donald Trump. If the primary goal of communism or a communist revolution is to first demoralize the American people, which is an absolute requirement for a communist revolution, demoralization, Donald Trump represented a remoralization of the American people that from the Chinese communist point of view could not be tolerated. The United States is the most powerful nation of the Judeo-Christian West. With Donald Trump as president, the principles of human freedom and the great traditions of the Christian West were being reborn. For that reason, the Chinese Communist Party must have believed that it must be destroyed, or at minimum, Donald Trump needed to be destroyed politically. Within 6 months of their declaration of a people's war, the COVID-19 virus was spreading throughout the world. And it matters little whether it was intentionally leaked from a lab or not. What is clear is that they allowed it to spread throughout the world, knowing the harm it would cause. And just as a practical matter, even if it were an intentional attack, in war, deception matters. And even an intentional attack would require that it look like an accident, as I'll discuss a little later. But it was always going to be presented as the possibility of a lab leak. Now, again, regardless, COVID-19 was used as a bioweapon against the United States, which leads me to the second point in this section. When you're trying to understand communist China, you really need to understand their belief in unrestricted warfare. There was a famous book by two colonels in 1999. They were colonels, of course, of the People's Liberation Army, and they wrote a book called Unrestricted Warfare. And it's been a popular document that I and my colleagues on the Committee on the Danger point to, because it's one of the ways to understand China and how they think about policy and statecraft. In the book, the two colonels believe that war between China and the United States is inevitable. And the PRC, they believe, must be prepared, if they are to win, to engage in whatever means are necessary to achieve this. And they say the variable means to achieve this victory include the use of economic warfare, cyber warfare, information warfare, political warfare. They use this phrase terrorism, biowarfare, and the like. They write that, they tell the world this in 1999. Wars, as we know, are fought on battlefields, on the seas, but yes, today they are also fought online, in the media, in boardrooms, in classrooms, and in laboratories. Their purpose in writing this document, which was very well known in China and outside of China, was to lay down a marker with U.S. policymakers that nothing was going to be out of bounds when it comes to how the PRC viewed the United States. They wanted to make sure the PRC was capable of waging war, and that they were committed doing so whenever and wherever it took. So for all the commerce we in the United States may engage in with the PRC, we ought to have no illusions that they see themselves as our enemy, and an enemy that they are allowed to do anything they want to because, after all, from their point of view, they're in a war with us. This leads me to the third part of my section on the Chinese Communist Party, and that's work that's been extensively done by my colleague on the Committee on the Present Danger, J.R. Nyquist. And he's really done extensive work in promoting a secret speech that was given in 2003. And it deals with what the Chinese communists think of as the problem of America. And it was articulated in this speech by the Chinese Defense Minister, General Shi Ho-shin. He gave it to members of the Politburo, and I'm going to focus a bit on it today because I think it is one of the most underappreciated documents that our intelligence community has and does not highlight. And I think you'll see where I'm going with this as I lay this out. He's talking to the people within the Politburo who are going to be planning out the future of Chinese strategy. And he's taking a long-term view the way the Chinese typically do. As he's laying out the problems for them to deal with, he is referencing Nazi Germany first in World War II, of course. He says about Nazi Germany, the following are the fundamental causes of their defeat, the Nazis. First, they had too many enemies all at once, as they did not adhere to the principles of eliminating enemies one at a time. Second, they were too impetuous, lacking the patience and perseverance required for great accomplishments. Third, when the time came for them to be ruthless, they turned out to be too soft, therefore leaving troubles that resurfaced later on. So just for perspective, Shi Ho-shin believes the Nazis were inherently, as he says, too soft to win the Second World War. So he lays out what ought to have been their strategy. He says, let's presume that back when Germany and Japan had been able to keep the United States neutral and had fought a protracted war step by step on the Soviet front, if they'd adopted this approach, gained some time to advance their research, eventually succeeded in obtaining the technology of nuclear weapons and missiles, and launched surprise attacks against the United States and the Soviet Union using them, then the United States and the Soviet Union would not have been able to defend themselves and would have had to surrender. Little Japan, he says, in particular, made an egregious mistake in launching the sneak attack on Pearl Harbor. This attack not hit the vital parts of the United States. Instead, it dragged the United States into the war, into the ranks of the gravediggers that eventually buried the German and Japanese fascists.
Well, that was interesting. I guess you can go see the rest of it at Hillsdale.